Good morning students and welcome back. Today we will continue learning History lesson number 2, Historiography Indian Tradition. In the previous lecture, we have already learned how we came to know about ancient historiography, medieval historiography and modern historiography. Today we will learn Indian historiography and their various ideological framework. First one is colonial historiography. Colony means a group of people who leave their native country and settle in another country and slowly establish their rule on that country. So Britishers also came and settled in India and then ruled on India. So after Britishers came in India, they wrote book on Indian history that is called colonial historiography. We have already learned that British officers were the first to write book on Indian history. So when Britishers came in India and ruled over India, that was a colonial rule in India. And the books written by British officers and by Christian missionaries means a group of people who came in India for spreading Christian religion. So the book written by British officers and Christian missionaries were in favor of British rule and Western culture. That means they wrote good about British rule in India and praised that Western culture is superior culture in the world. And also they spread Western culture by criticizing Indian culture in India and showed the superiority of Western culture in the world. So they showed dark side of India and wrote bad about Indian culture. Their writings were used to justify the colonial British rule. That means they were proving that British rule is good for India and British rule only should be in India because Indians were uneducated and backward and Britishers were giving education and modernizing India. So British rule is good for India was mentioned in their writing. The 5 volumes of the book Cambridge History of India was published during 1922 to 1937 are distinct examples of colonial historiography. Now next we shall learn about Orientalist historiography. Many European scholars felt curious about civilization and countries of the East. Some of those scholars felt admiration and respect for them. That means all the British historians were not bad. There were some European historians who were curious to know about the Eastern countries' history. They admired and showed respect to other countries' history also. So European scholars showed interest to know about Indian culture, Indian language and Indian tradition, and they wrote good about Indian history. So those scholars were known as Orientalists. So when Orientalists did research on Indian Sanskrit language, they found similarities between Sanskrit and some of the European languages. They focused on Vedic tradition and Sanskrit literature and came to the conclusion that Sanskrit is the mother of all languages. That means most of the languages of the world are derived from the Sanskrit language. So they called ancient language, that is Sanskrit language, as Indo-European language. In 1784, Sir William Jones founded Asiatic Society in Kolkata. And after establishment of Asiatic Society in Kolkata, many historians did research on ancient Indian literature and in Indian history. As per Frederick Max Muller's opinion, Sanskrit was the most ancient language of Indo-European languages. He had deeply studied Sanskrit literature. Frederick Max Muller translated the Sanskrit text of Hitopadesh in German language. He had also edited 50 volumes of the Sacred Book of the East. That means the Sacred Book of East was written in 50 volumes, that is 50 books. He also compiled Rig Veda. Compiled means to gather all information. So he gathered all information of Rig Veda and published it in 6 volumes. He also translated Rig Veda in German. Then Edward Said, who was also a scholar, re-evaluated the Orientalist writings. That means Edward read many books written by Orientalist scholars and then came to the conclusion that Orientalist scholars had thrown light on imperialistic interest. That means Orientalist scholars also wrote about the interest of British rule in India. Now next we shall learn nationalistic historiography. Our Indian historians wrote books on Indian history that is called nationalistic historiography. All these Indian historians studied in British school, read books on Indian history which was written by British scholars and understood that Britishers had showed dark side of India in their writings. So then Indian historians decided to write books on Indian history to bring back the pride and respect by glorifying Indian history. That means to show the world rich culture of India. Nationalistic writings in Maharashtra were inspired by Vishnu Shastri Chiplunkar. He criticized the writings of British officers and wrote the correct history of ancient India. Later, many Indian historians wrote books on Indian history. They are Mahadev Govind Ranade, Ramakrishna Gopal Bhandarkar, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, Rajendra Lal Mishra, Ramesh Chandra Majumdar, Kashi Prasad Jaiswal, Radha Kumud Mukherjee, Bhagwan Lal Indraji, Vasudev Vishnu Mirashi, and Anant Sadashiv Altekar. So remember all these names as nationalistic historians. Now let's see, do you know? Justice Mahadev Govind Ranade has explained the background of rise of Maratha Empire in great details in his book, The Rise of Maratha Power. So remember this, that Justice Mahadev Ranade has written book The Rise of Maratha Power. According to him, Maratha power did not rise suddenly like forest fire, but the ground for it in Maharashtra on the social, cultural and religious levels was getting ready over a prolonged period. That means Shivaji Maharaj's rule was not sudden. He slowly gained support of the people of society to rule. Rajwade is well known for his writings in Marathi on various subjects like history, linguistic, etymology, grammar, etc. Linguistic means study of language and etymology means study of words' origin. For example, the word history is derived from the Greek word. So learning of original word is called etymology. Rajwade was of the firm opinion that we should write our own history. He compiled and edited 22 volumes of Marathancha Itihasची Sadhane. He stated history is the all-inclusive image of the past societies. It does not include only the stories of political images, conspiracies, and wars for seizing power. That means, like Voltaire, Rajwade also said, history is not about only kings, wars, political administration, but also about learning social life, culture, climate, agriculture, etc. And he also stated that history should be written by using the authentic, that is original document. Now let's see, do you know? V.K. Rajwade founded Bharat Itihas Samshodak Mandal in Pune on 7th July 1910 to facilitate historical research. So remember this for the objectives. The nationalistic historiography also encouraged Indian people against the British rule for independence movement. So Vinayak Damodar Savarkar wrote the book The Indian War of Independence of 1857. In 1857, Indians fought first time against the British rule. This was the biggest national uprising against the British. So Vinayak Damodar Savarkar has described that war in his book The Indian War of Independence of 1857. The nationalistic historiography provided a momentum to the writing of regional histories too. Regional histories means history of a particular state. For example, V.K. Rajwade wrote History of Maharashtra. As a result, historians wrote history of South India also. And this made aware to the people about the North and South culture of India and history of every region. Now next we shall learn historiography in the post-independence era. That means after independence of India, what change took place in writing history, that we shall learn. So histories were written on various communities, science, economic system, political ideologies, cultural aspects, etc. The historiography of this era has been influenced mainly by three ideological schools. First, Marxist History, second, Subaltern History, and third, Feminist History. Now next we shall learn about Marxist History. We have already studied about Karl Marx in first lesson. Karl Marx was a German philosopher. His theory of class struggle was divided into haves and haves not. Haves are earning through production and becoming richer, whereas haves not are being exploited. So there is becoming gap between rich and poor people. So writing about the haves not group of society is called Marxist history. The concern for the means of production, modes of production, and the industrial relations were at the center in the writings of Marxist historians. take example of means of production. Owner set up factory and hire workers to work in factory. So what is produced in factory, that profit is earned by the owners and hardly is given to the worker to look after his livelihood. So Karl Marx was of the opinion that both worker and owner are equally important for that production, so that there should be equal distribution of profit, so that there will be no rich and poor in society, and society will be equal. So society should not be discriminated by rich and poor. That was the thinking of Karl Marx. Marxist historians in India studied the transitions within the caste system. That means our Indian historians did the study of higher caste and lower caste in society. Indian historians who adopted Marxist ideological framework are Damodar Dharmanand Kosambi, Comrade Shripat Amrut Dhange, Ram Sharan Sharma, Comrade Sharad Patil. Comrade Dhange was one of the founder members of the Indian Communist Party. Comrade Dhange wrote the book Primitive Communism to Slavery, represents Marxist historiography. Now next we shall learn Subaltern history. Subaltern means of inferior rank. That means bottommost rank of people in the society. That is the lowest class poor people. The seeds of subaltern history are found in the Marxist historiography. As Marxist historians wrote about the group of people who comes in has not, that is laborer, worker. So subaltern historians got inspired from Marxist historians and started writing history of lowest group of society. The role of the Italian historian Antonio Gramsci is very important in developing the idea that history should be written starting from the bottommost ranks of the people in the society. The word subaltern was adopted by Antonio Gramsci to refer to those working class people of society, that is, bottommost ranks or position. The reason of writing subaltern history was to make people aware about the injustice done to them and to retake history for the underclass people, the voice that had not been heard previous. Ranjit Guha was the first Indian historian to write on subaltern history. Before subaltern ideology, Mahatma Jyotirao Phule and Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar had already written about the poor people, about Shudras, that is untouchable people. Mahatma Phule wrote the history of Shudras Atishudras in his book Gulam Giri. Shudras means the lowest rank of the four Varnas, and Atishudras means the lowest rank division of Shudras, called as Mahar Chambar. Mahatma Phule drew attention to the exploitation of women, Shudras and Atishudras done under the name of religion. Then Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar focused on Dalit caste peoples of Indian society. He wrote two books, who were the Shudras and the next the Untouchables. Now next we shall learn Feminist history. Feminist history means writing about the women in a book. Earlier, only achievements of men and their history was written. the role and achievements of women in history was neglected. Nothing was written about women. So, feminist historians, that is, women historians, highlight the achievements of women in their writings, which made Indians to rethink of women's position in history. Among women authors writing about women in the 19th century, Tarabai Shinde was the first. She wrote attacking the male-dominated social system and the caste system. She wrote about the men have most of the power in society and injustice done to women, and also wrote about caste discrimination. Her book Stree Purush Tulna, published in 1882, is acknowledged as the first feminist book in India. In 1888, the book written by Pandita Ramabai was published, entitled The High Caste Hindu Woman. Then the Meera Kaushambi's book Crossing Threshold, Feminist Essays in Social History, is of importance. This book contains essays on the life stories of women like Pandita Ramabai and on Dr. Rukmabai, who was the first practicing lady doctor of India. There were many books written on Dalit women in Maharashtra. One of the books on Dalit was written by Dr. Sharmila Rege is noteworthy. Her book Writing Caste, Writing Gender, Reading Dalit Women's Testimonies includes her essays on the autobiographies of Dalit women. Now let's see, do you know? Publication of a book Marathi Riyasat by Govind Sakaram Sardesai was a momentous achievement in the field of Indian historiography. His work became so famous that people began to address him as Riyasatkar. He published several volumes of Maratha history. That means Govind Sakaram Sardesai wrote many books on Maratha history. Now let's see the historians who wrote Indian history without embracing a particular ideology. That means they did not follow one particular ideology, like writing book on only Marxist history or on feminist history. They just wrote history of India without being partial. Those historians are Sir Jadunath Sarkar, Surendranath Sen, Riyasatkar Govind Sakaram Sardesai, and Triambak Shankar Sejwalkar. Now remember the recent times historians who have contributed extensively to the historiography of modern India. So recent times historians are Yashwant Dinkar Phadke and Ramchandra Guha. Among these, Ramchandra Guha is very popular in writing the modern history of India. So students, here we finish the lesson. We have learnt the tradition of historiography of ancient, medieval and modern period, and Indian historiography and their various ideological frameworks. So go through the lesson once again. Goodbye and take care.